is actually working. Yeah, it's looking good. Good. Alright, let me know. Audio balance. I think I'm going to make the music a bit louder. Let's try that. Alright, cool. So yeah, today I'm going to take... Well, I was going to take a look at Arabia anyway, and I thought I'd do it on stream. You can't edit the... or for some reason it wasn't working when I was editing the actual map game, so I made a copy and put it into my map scripts folder, and we're going to edit that. I just wanted to see how it's set up because I actually never did that. So this is just the default Arabia by Crescini with its different seasons and with the new further away pawns with some sort of special things according to woodline, according to the patch notes, with woodlines being further or closer. We'll take a look and see if we can confirm that. First, I want sort of a desert one again, please. Yeah, no, well, give me the full desert one. It's probably African is the one, right? I think that's probably the one I want. Let's just give it a few more generations. You'll notice it's kind of slow. That's probably all the actor areas, but we'll see about those. Okay, seriously, I want the desert theme. I had it the first time. It can't be that hard to generate it again. Is it that? All right. Well, you know what? We'll do a bit of testing here. We'll start right there, and we're just going to take a look at this Eastern theme of Arabia. So that's Eastern. All right. That's kind of what I wanted. The other themes, we could look at those later. Let's not worry about those for now. What I wanted to do instead, there's a lot of stuff here that we are not going to look at because it's not specific to this map. Changing the decay times of things and so on. We'll start right about here, land generation. No waves, fair enough. But actually, let's just pop in a break after land generation and we'll take a look. Yeah, that's... So what we have here is this is like the rice farm terrain. That's being used for the lands, and then everything else is the desert around it. And what this is doing is it's going to keep the hills and cliffs away from the player start areas. So we can now move our break. Let's move it. We take a look. We can take a look at the elevation at this stuff here. Let's see. We're creating a base terrain. It has 420 tiles. Ah, there is a land in the middle with no tiles. Actually, before we do any more, let's start defining some things. So if we say, let's, just go define unorthodox setup. Let's see what happens if we do define unorthodox setup. Then it doesn't bother with the special lands here. So we'll have to see, when does unorthodox setup actually get defined? It apparently doesn't. Maybe I need to get rid of the tab in my search. Better. 3 players on a tiny map is an unorthodox setup. basically, if it's too many players on too small of a map, that is what's considered an unorthodox setup. Alright, cool. Good. So in that case, we just use the same base train that's being used everywhere else, which is sort of what classic Arabia would do. But if we have an orthodox setup, then we use our placeholder. Ah, interesting. So we're just making non-existently small player lands when it's unorthodox. And otherwise, we're creating a certain number of tiles. R&D generation old. Ah, so we can have forests spawn in different distances. We're making them... We have sort of a near, medium, far, but it seems this is probably what's defined. Let's take a look and search for that. Oh, God. Too many of these. Oh, my goodness. Count. 54 matches. All right. Now, if we look at this thing, by default, it's actually only using the old and not the new. So that's what's active. I wonder, maybe we could condense it down to the things that are actually active. So that allows forests to spawn different distances. Because these lands will be smaller or larger. Clever. Alright, so that's what's active here. All this stuff doesn't matter. The circle radius. Yeah, okay, fine. Let's take a look at elevation generation next. So we'll put a break in here. R&D generation new isn't active, so we shouldn't see any elevation if we do this. And we don't see any elevation when we do that, correct? So what we're using actually is R&D generation old. So we have, all right, we have low, medium, high, immense. Should we see if all of these are possible? Nine matches I can go through. All right, so that is possible. And then he's basically, yeah, you need to scale by map size. Because that's necessary for elevation scaling, bottom line. So what if we put in the break here? Then there is an R&D spawn elevation. That's how much elevation should be close to players in their spawn area. So this is the elevation that's on the outside. And that can be higher or lower depending on, like this is a lower one. This is a higher one, yeah. All right. Yeah, basically, it can be they can be higher or lower at random. But this is all the elevation that's sort of not close to players. But we want to also see, let's take a look at the spawn elevation. So spawn elevation, and here we'll just put a break before cliffs, and take another peek at what that does. So as expected, that allows some hills to be placed close to players. And looking at our code, we can have spawn elevation can be anything from... Alright, it's basically dependent on the number of players. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1. And we can have spawn elevation going from none to immense. Let's see if immense is possible. It is possible at a very low chance. That's good. I like that it's possible to get that, even if it's unlikely. So yeah, the spawn elevation is these few hills that are close to you. You'll notice they're not very likely, but they are possible now. What you will see is there's this ring of sorts where there'll never be elevation, like the border between the outside area and the player lands. But overall, that's pretty good. And you can have ones where there's really a lot of elevation. Like this would be tough to build TCs anywhere else. While here it's more manageable, shall we say? Now let's put in the cliff generation. We're using RNG generation. New is not active. We're using RNG generation old, so we'll put in a break down below and take a look at old. Interesting that old is actually the one that's being used now. But we see global cliffs can be none. I don't think that. Maybe that's something that's like, I don't know. That's random as well. We'll take a look at that. Count, there are 2 matches. 20% chance that there are no cliffs. Alright, then there's a chance for few, normal, and many. Alright. And you have to scale cliffs with map size as well. Few, normal, many. Cliff curliness, that's not very curly for all. Now the other thing with cliffs is that they avoid elevation, which makes it real difficult for the cliffs to actually find any place to spawn. So you're not really seeing even as many cliffs as Crazini intends. Let's just put in that one. Let's not select that. Let's not select that. We'll make our own. Pop it in here. Don't need some end diffs in there, or we can just something like that. If we do this, you might expect, okay, there are going to be 100 cliffs, but there aren't. Because, well, okay, there are actually a fair number of cliffs. I take back what I was going to say. But overall, the cliffs can only spawn where there's no elevation. They're also not allowed to spawn on a water terrain, so they won't spawn close to the players either. Which kind of limits where you get cliffs. You could get a lot if you really force a lot, but yeah, just the hills make it hard for the cliffs to even be particularly large a lot of the time. Still, it's welcome. Cliffs are a welcome thing to see back on Arabia, honestly. Alright, so I think we can move on. Cliffs are relatively not complicated. Activate the standard code again. There we go. Now this is one which doesn't have many hills at all. Honestly, from what I've seen so far, actually, Crazini's done a really good job here. There's still the thing that a lot of these hills are tricky to build on, but that's just because the classic Arabia had them horribly unbalanced, so you had huge plateaus everywhere. These hills are very balanced in how they're spread out. but it does make it very hilly everywhere. That's could still be tweaked, but it's overall I'm liking what I see here. All right, terrain generation is going to be a biggie. Color correction, Let's put a cut after temporary forest. That's what we want to see. That's where we want to see what's happening. Alright, so far nothing has happened with the temporary forest. R&D generation old. Create terrain, temporary forest, base terrain, base terrain. I'm not seeing a temporary forest, to be perfectly honest. There we go, now I'm seeing a temporary forest. Indeed. Basically, these areas are where the TC will spawn. And if you hang around for probably another 10-15 minutes, you'll see why this is being done. But essentially, this allows the map scripter to make sure that each person has starting woodlines. So this is going to be there's one of the players is going to be here, and one of them is going to be here. This time there are a lot of players, a lot of hills around the starting area. Often they're not many, but this is it's currently a dead rice farm, but the fact that it's water means that the cliffs stay away, and the fact that it's a unique terrain means that forests can be on it. Good evening. And these things seem to be the areas where forests will spawn in the neutral area later on. We'll have to move a bit further though. If deathmatch isn't active, so R&D Global Forests Ponds none. That's probably not active either. Unorthodox setup we saw at the beginning, that means you get rid of this stuff. That's if there are lots of people on a tiny map, because then there isn't room to do an area like this. Let's put in our break. Ah, I see how it is. He's creating the ponds first. Interesting. That being said, I don't see the ponds. But this is R&D Global Ponds none. Let's see what the probability of that is. 30% chance of no ponds. And otherwise, you can have a couple ponds. So let's just generate a few. We should see ponds eventually. I'm not seeing ponds yet, to be honest. Not seeing ponds yet. Alright, there we've got some ponds. So the ponds, because they're a water terrain, they can only be on flat areas as well. So we don't end up with many, and you can have either 2 ponds, 4 ponds, or 6 ponds. And they can be anywhere in the non-player woodlines. Player woodlines will be on this area, the non-player woodlines are further out. I don't know, I think I would have personally implemented it differently. But this does ensure, it just does do the trick, I suppose. Keeping the ponds far enough away. There's really a big variance in how many hills you get on Arabia. Like this is a rolling mountain range right now. Yeah, now we have... I like this one because you can tell exactly where the forests are going to be. Let's use the seed for a moment. Feel free to also ask any questions or think about if you have anything that you want me to look at later. We're creating straggler forests and then straggler forest variations. Let's create the straggler forest first. Let's see what that does. Huh. So that creates some additional forest that isn't these forests, but just some random other forests. Okay. On the base terrain. And then straggler forest variation he's going to put a bit of a different, you're going to mix a bit of a different terrain into these here. Now we have some dead trees mixed into this forest. Interesting. All right, let's see how it looks on other seeds. Yeah, so here we have... It's basically just a few tiny forest bits that can be somewhere at random. Got our ponds again and our straggler forests. Alright, alright. Let's use this seed. So we get this out. Define independent forest. Secure forest. Oh gosh, he's defining a lot of things. So independent forest is just defined. I'm just going to do a bit of recording to see if... That's interesting. So give me a second, I need to get some new music. Let's grab the jazz folder. I've upgraded my list. There we go. Okay. Secure forests. 1 generation, 2 player, 2, 3 generations. 8 generations. Well, I don't know off the top of my head. We will find out. Or you could count it, I suppose, with some sort of Python script, but we're not going to do that. So here it seems like we're deciding how often we have to generate forests based on how many players there are. Fair enough. We are always defining independent forest, so valid forest is defined, so this else case just doesn't matter. One generation. Well, currently we should be doing 2 generations, right? So we're defining 1 generation and 2 generations. So we actually we'll put in a break after both of them. This is the typical way that Arabia generates forests now for it to be balanced. So 1 generation, oh boy, has put in the placeholder here. Ah, that's interesting. This is not something that you can do in RMS. I think I'm guessing that specific height is never defined, probably. Count, there are 8 matches. Yeah, specific height is never defined. So this suggests to me that Cuisine is using some sort of external script here to fill in values. I would say. But that doesn't matter. That isn't being defined. Flat only. Huh, interesting. So let's move down a bit. We'll move down to 2 generations because we're doing a 2v2 or 1v1 here. So now both of them are placeholders. I'm not sure why that was necessary to turn them into a placeholder. You could have just replaced the mangrove terrain. Maybe because that would leave beaches. Maybe because that would leave beaches. So we've got 2 placeholders now. So now we're just going to ignore these cases here. 8 because they're all the same. And then we have something called create terrain origin placeholder. We're replacing replace A. Each of these terrains that he's created is a different placeholder. Let's take a look at where he defines these. Oh, 23 matches. Let's start at the beginning. He's using basically all of the moddable terrains, I think. Fair enough. All right. All right, let's see what happens if we do this. Aha, we have a ring here. So basically, this is going to make sure that the forests are not super close to the players either, because they're going to be in this ring here. I see that this is what's happening here. Because we're using generation old, the spacing is only 6, the ring isn't as wide as it could be in this case. All right. Yes, placeholder reception. Now the whole thing should happen 8 times. Oh, no, okay, here it's just happening multiple times to make sure it worked properly. Then, B is being replaced. B is the one that we're going to see down on the mini-map there. So we can just scroll all the way past when H is being... H. Good. Now, invalid forest, I believe, is never true, so we don't need to look at that. But let's take a look at this. So now we've created 2 of these donut rings. All right. So now we have invalid forest. Now, I'm pretty sure that invalid forest just isn't defined, if I remember correctly. Yeah, no, there's an else if valid forest, but we're always defining valid forest because we're always defining independent forest. So invalid forest is never defined. So that is irrelevant. So now we're here at if valid forest. And create terrain spawn forest. Base terrain replace A. This is this area here, this placeholder area. If teams connected, dynamic teams connected. When is that a thing that's defined? That's for all the way down to H. Teams connected just isn't true either. There's a lot of this code that could be removed, and it would be a bit easier to understand once you've done that. This is what it's doing, and it could be called a good way. It is easier now because you can say min distance to players. You can just here set avoid player start areas. You can just set a value here. And then that makes you not have to bother with quite so much of this. Now, I think the reason why he's doing this, I'll show it in a second. Let's see, where does the statement end? It ends right about here. Let's just put in a break here. So yeah, it creates 3 forests. And they have to be in this ring here that we saw. And we can take a quick look at what's doing that. The size gets bigger on bigger maps, that makes sense. R&D new isn't true. R&D old. The size of the forest can be randomized. Because that was in the patch notes. So he picks that defined different things earlier at the beginning. At the very top of the script where that can be chosen. Forest normal, so few, normal, many, and if they're many, yeah, then they're just more tiles. And what's the difference here too? Number of clumps. So few is 2 clumps. Normal is 3 clumps and many is 4 clumps. And then they have different sizes too. Fair enough. I don't think any of these things are going to be active. Avoid spawn count. Avoid spawn specific. I don't think he's using avoidance at all right now. Enable avoidance. Let's see if he uses that count. 10 matches. Yeah, no, he's not using avoidance. He's not using avoid spawn. He's not using whatever dynamic size is. Yeah. I could honestly make a simplified version of this by just saying, all right, it looks like enable avoidance isn't defined, so we just delete it wherever it appears. And we say, all right, invalid forest is never defined, so we delete everything wherever it says if invalid forest. And one could make things a bit easier that way. But let's do something here. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a couple different generations. Now what the system he does allows him to do that maybe isn't so easy to do with a less complicated one is that the distance can be further or closer easily, and there's always still room for the forests. Like sometimes you have sort of a big area around where they're close, sometimes they're further away. Here they're pretty close. And here they're somewhat further away. Here they're even further away. It's a pretty clever system. It's very complicated though. Here they're quite far away because this whole area that forests can be in is bigger. So let's move on a bit more. Let's see, all right. That just lags even uncommenting stuff, so we did the forest there, then we have, what is this thing? Oh. RNG generation pond terrain. Haha! Alright, I need to put in a break right here. Basically, this allows ponds to spawn in the player forests. Although, is it actually going to happen is the thing. The answer is yes. Like, I think that one is in a player forest. So what this does is it allows one or theoretically even two ponds to spawn in each player forest. So 9 matches of that, one where it's defined, and then for each of the players. So 85% chance that there are no ponds in the starting forests, 10% chance that there's one, and 5% chance that there's two. Ooh. All right. It would be easy to not have these wood lines be in the play, to not have these ponds be in these wood lines. I mean, it'll be fair. There'll be one for each player when we uncomment the part for the other players. But this is kind of rough. And I don't see why there would have been anything wrong with just allowing the ponds to be in the neutral forests. Although, I guess classically Arabia did do this. Let's see, what is collapse? Break. Let's see what collapse is. Count 12 matches. Collapse, 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 collapse. Define collapse. All right. Well, collapse is defined. So this thing happens. It creates a temporary forest on the spawn forest many times for some reason. All right. I'm not sure what that's doing, the temporary force this collapse is doing. This I'm a bit confused about. Collapse, temporary forest. Let's see what temporary forest is. 101. temporary forest. Probably gets replaced again. I don't know what this is. We'll see. We'll see going forward. Maybe. Yeah, count. That's a lot of matches. We're not going to look at that just yet. We'll look at that later. Too many temporary forests. All right. So then we just do the same thing 8 times. All of this mess with the collapsing and temporary. Actually, I know how we can do this. We're going to put in a break here. So for the second player, we're going to have them not do this temporary forest thing. Huh. 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 All right. I don't know what's going on there. To me, it looks as if these are the forests for player 2. Except these aren't forests yet. But if we get rid of the collapse thing, put in the break here, maybe they'll turn into forests then. So this is another placeholder. Or maybe that will remove forests. Why? Ha! So this collapse thing, it removes forests created by the previous generation. For some reason. We'll see why later on. But it removes the forests again. That's confusing. We had nice forests here. Don't remove them again. Alright, let's move down. Let's see, how are we doing? F. Collapse, collapse, collapse. Collapse. Alright, let's put a thingy here above debug mode. See what we end up with then. We need to put in a break a bit earlier than debug mode. Let's see, so this is H. This is the forest H with its ponds. Let's put in a break right here. This is even more complicated than I expected. Or that basically looks like what we had before. So let's take the collapse. What is this? This is if collapse. If is true though, so that's done. So then we're here. Let's try this. Alright. I still don't understand why we've removed the forests. Surely some reason for that. Here we're creating... So the previous collapses created temporary forest on spawn forest. Now we create spawn forest on temporary forest. Alright. So this collapse thing, what it did is it made... We already had these terrains here set up, these areas for forests to spawn in the neutral area. This now has the same terrain as this. So then when we add in forests, they'll be everywhere. Let's see. Yeah. So now we have our player forests and our neutral forests and our tiny straggler forests. And our non-existent ponds this time around. Now we have lots of ponds. because each player has one pond in their wood line. These are just neutral ponds. It's nice. The placeholder ring really lets you know what's going on here. All right, debug mode I believe isn't active, so that doesn't matter. But this is else. So we're creating spawn terrain on top of placeholder terrain. What that does is get rid of the placeholders. Maybe it doesn't get rid of the placeholders. Creating spawn terrain on top of placeholder terrain. Interesting. It would make sense if debug mode prevented this from happening, but I think origin constant is something that we did define. Nope, didn't. That's not defined, so that's not true. This is another else case, spawn terrain. This will then get rid of the placeholders? No, but what it did do is take the area that was in the middle and now make it the same as the outside, so we now have an actual donut. Yeah, there's really a lot behind the scenes. And there's also, if you pay attention, there's a lot you can learn here. Like if your forest has a wood line, your wood line has a pond, and you scout a wood line with a pond, it could be the one belonging to your opponent, because your opponent will also have one of those. Tricky, tricky, tricky. All right, so now I think we replace A. Now we replace the placeholders. All right. Scroll, 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 scroll. Break. All right, so now this is kind of the base that you have Arabia in. And at this point, it's the big clear areas, those are where the players will be, but other than that, other than the lack of hills, you can't easily tell where things were happening, I would say. Like this is perhaps a bit more complicated than it needs to be, but it really, at this point, you can't notice it anymore, and it does look good. Honestly, my main critique is just all of these hills that are so difficult potentially to build on. Then again, I don't play Arabia much, so I shouldn't criticize. Create base forest variation A. So that just adds some variation in. So we should see. Let's take a look here. Yeah, we have a bit of a mix. Pine trees and oak trees here, for example. Here, jungle. It might just be jungle. I do this on my maps too. So here there doesn't seem to be much mixing. Then we create more variation in it. Let's try here. Yeah, that's just a bit of forest mixing. Bamboo here, and it's the same forest that was used for these little straggler forests. It's also mixed in just a bit. Not sure if it's being mixed specifically on the outside. Nah. Not specifically. Now we're creating terrain blend A, blend B, blend C. Let's just see that. Just probably add some cosmetic mixing, I'd say. Yeah. leaf patches here if we're playing on a green version. That's just your typical terrain masking. Yeah. Then we have we do the same thing on the forests to mix a bit there. And on the straggler forest, we did say collapse is true, so we're going to have to look at that in a moment. Let's see here. What this basically does is just mix the leaves a bit under the forest. You don't see it unless you go delete them. Then you see that potentially there's some mixing in, yeah, like this stuff here. So we have collapse, great terrain, base terrain, blah. What is this collapse doing? This I don't know. Let's activate the whole collapse thing. Base terrain. Oh, I think it's just more terrain masking. Scroll. Oh my goodness. You have to do it very many times to make sure that it actually replaces all the clumps. But I wonder if it's really necessary to do it quite that many times. Let's see now. I believe what this has done, without having looked at it in too much detail, it's just done a bit more mixing under the forests, probably. But here we go with our Arabia. Now if we take a look at this, this seems to be the kind of far wood lines here. Maybe only 2 wood lines, like that's one of the starting ones, and tough, 1, 2, 3 maybe, and 1, 2, 3, and the rest are neutral ones. And then we have our objects generation. Terrain debugging probably isn't true. Preliminaries, safe learnable. Do we even want to look at this? Because this is going to get out of control. Create placeholder. This stuff here, probably we're not going to see anything because this is a placeholder. This is not something that we can see yet. Edge avoidance. Collapse. He's creating a bunch of placeholders. All right, let's take a look. So we're creating an off-grid placeholder here. This is a placeholder on the center of the map. And what it's doing is it's in the middle of the map. It has a pretty big radius. And what it does is it prevents forward resources. Because it makes things avoid. Actually, how could we do this? How can we show this? Let's just put in something here. Create object flag A. Number of object. Yeah, let's just put in some thick code here and see what we can do. We've had 9,000 flags. They're everywhere, more or less. And we need a break after them. And then what we also want is avoid actor area 50-30. There we go. Avoid actor area 50-30. There we go. Now what we should see is not what I'm expecting. Did I do something wrong here? Close. Why are we not avoiding that? Set place for every player. Set place for every player. Try that now. Could be a bit laggy. No, we're not creating only one. We want to fill the map, but why are they not avoiding... Why are they not avoiding this? Well, probably this stuff isn't true. Maybe safe lurable isn't true. Count. Safe lurable. Alright, we're not doing safe lurable. I see how it is. See, he has a bunch of code in here that isn't necessarily active. Maybe it's active in other maps of his. But by having this framework, he can just use it in any map. And then if he needs to, he can avoid the center, but he's not doing it here. So safe lurable does not happen. We're going to take our break. This is our break statement. Now we're going to move that past this thing that helps you avoid the edge. Yeah, exactly. But that code isn't active. Alright, so this thing now makes things avoid the absolute edge of the map. This statement here. Now, this we also don't really need anymore with the ability to do, what's it called? Min distance to map edge. Like, if he uses that, then he doesn't need to do this anymore with this edge avoider either. Then we have collapses is true. What this is essentially doing... What this is doing here is creating an actor area. I actually do something similar in my maps sometimes when actor areas are important. He's creating one of every radius. So the one that 6001 has a radius of 1, 6005 has a radius of 5, and he's creating those on each player. I have a ring around each player. Or well, a square actually. All the way to radius... Oh my goodness, this is why why Arabia generates slowly. He's creating 64 actor areas. Like the old Arabia by the Prophet and the other DE maps use like 10 of these, maybe, not 64. Just to give a couple of bands. Alright, so if we put in a break there, that shouldn't do anything because that's just those actor areas. So create straggler trees. Terrain to place on straggler forest variation. Let's do that. I think that's created... Basically, we had these little straggler forests, these things. You can tell because they're smaller than the other forests. And now he's filling those with trees because he created some holes in them earlier. Now he's filling them with dead trees or something. That's fairly clever. Yeah, he essentially created, in the terrain generation, he created some holes, tiny holes, in these straggler forests, and now he's filling them with dead trees, mostly. Sure. Then we have centralize object. Object. Oh, this is whether or not it needs to be placed exactly on the middle or not, or if it should be placed on the grid instead. I wouldn't say it's bad scripting. I would say it's certainly possible to have this script be a lot shorter and achieve a similar effect. Well, it's possible to have it shorter and achieve the identical effect by just removing all the things that aren't active. Then you can't activate them easily later on. But you could edit those out of the release build or something. And it's possible to also achieve a similar Arabia, I want to think, with not quite as much of this stuff. So we have our town center. That was nothing special about that. Let's move on. Empire Wars, Regicide, Nomad Start. Else create couples therapy. I think this... Alright. What the heck is this? We're creating an off-grid placeholder. 3 of them. We're finding the closest tile. I think this is what the villagers are going to be placed on. Yeah, basically this is just where the villagers are going to be. I think. Because we're then creating these. Alright, we have to think about this. This is an act area 5,200. This is 5,210. And it avoids the couples therapy, so it avoids... It's preventing villagers from being right next to each other, because that will be a couple. Alright. Let's put in a break here. And let's activate debug mode. This is actually fair. This is a clever thing to do with the debug mode. Be able to debug at will. So basically we have 4 flags here around each player. And if I put in the break earlier, what does that change? Those are then 3 flags. Those are probably the 3 villager spawn places. So then this one adds a 4th one where the scout would be. I don't know. Let's see. Let's go a bit further and say, all right, we've placed the villager here. We're creating... Now we have to think about this. Why are we creating 2 villagers? And they're trying to avoid the flags that we placed. Alright, there's our couple. So I think what he wants is he wants 2 villagers next to each other and 1 in a different position, so that you take the 2 and build a house with that. I think that's what this is for. And the placeholders are such that the couple can be in a different position each time, although it usually ends up being on the left, I think. Alright, so then we place 1 more villager. We place a villager, but we have to do it as a second object, otherwise we'd spawn 3 villagers. Probably. And where is that one going to spawn? On one of the other flags, probably? Let's take a look. Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. The thing is, this might be a little bit over-engineered. I currently have mine set up so that villagers spawn on 3 of these, and the 4th one is the scout, and it's just at random. What my maps then do mean, though, is that you don't have 2 villagers close together for an easy house building. Well, here you basically always do. Might be a bit over-engineered, to be honest. Let's go further. What is this here? We're creating a placeholder to create either the king for regicide or the scout, or either the queen for regicide or the scout. Now, the queen in regicide is probably just the scout replacement, but she doesn't cause you to lose. Well, I think that's why Crazzini, designed all this, so that you could get the consistency. All right, and then basically the scout appears at one of the other flags. Yeah, I mean, I have my maps have villagers in the same positions, except that one of them is here, and you have no couple. You have no couple in therapy. So let's remove our debug mode here for now. And enable walls. Shall we? Arabia doesn't use walls, but the thing is that this allows him to use the same code for a lot of different maps and just define different things in each one. At the top, like, this is probably the same in all of them. And then at the top, it's just, whether or not to enable walls. So you could have walled Arabia. Yeah, let's focus on. What would be good though is if you had this as an included file, similar to the what's it called, the land and water resources or something like that. Yeah. Corner piece. All right, so we don't care about the walls. Let's skip ahead a bit. Regicide, castle, capture the relic. I mean, essentially, this is, yeah, it's the type of thing I have this, but only for hyper random. And then for other maps, I just copy parts into it that I want. Definitely having the whole thing could be useful though, because then you can just edit it once, edit all your maps. Do we care? Should we just, let's put in a break above the primary shrubbery. Alright, so we placed our trees. I'm not going to go into detail about that. They're more or less in a circle. It does the trick. They're very much in a circle. He probably did something there to 5 stragglers. Okay, not too much. They just stay away from each other and find the closest tile. So let's say we have a shrub. That's our bush. It looks pretty standard. It stays away from the walls. It stays away from itself. That doesn't do anything. It stays away from the castle if there is one. It stays away from the monastery if it's capture the relic. And it stays 10 tiles away from the players. Now this is actually why he can't use the round. I'll put in a break here for a second. This is why he can't use the circle placement right now, because he's not actually using min and max distance to players at all. He's only using actor areas to place all the resources. It's also why the maps generate slowly, because all of these actor areas need to be checked. I think. We've done this on some maps. Minimum shrub spacer. Alright, we're not going to look at Empire Wars. Let's not overdo it. And we place an off-grid thing. Placing some sort of object here to make future things stay away from the... Basically, we're placing an object on the berries that will help keep other things away in the future. Yeah. Primary gold. This is always unnecessary to have it avoiding itself. But see, it stays away from the... Stays away from the things on the berry bushes. Primary stone, it's basically similar. Then we have... Where am I going to take another look? Furthest distance. Let's just scroll a bit after we're done with your position. We're blocking 7th villager. Fat herdable. I could look in detail at this, but it's not that exciting. Let's create a break here. That should be before the herdables. Alright, we even have our primary herdables already. And one of them starts under the control of the player. A criticism I had for a while, but it doesn't seem to be an issue so much here, is that the resources were very much still in the perpendicular lines, but I think it's gotten a bit better. How does he do that, though, to make sure that it's... Is he using... He does use find closest. Yeah, okay, he basically is using find closest, but then just saying, alright, it needs to stay away from other things, so that's why it's not a perfect perpendicular line. Alright, where did we put in our break? We put it in here. Let's get our herdables, get our lurables. Combine ungulate. Revealer temporary. And basically all the things that have been created earlier, we're now avoiding them when we create things later on. And actuaries allow you to do this at some performance cost when generating. Heretic A. Should we see what that is? Nah, let's keep going. Extra stuff. That's a good place to put in a break. Let's see what we have before extra stuff. Now we've created all of our other things. And this is the point where I start saying, because of the way he set things up, things are just too much in a line. It's not always a problem, but often is. Because essentially he's using actor areas and he's using find closest, but he's not doing what the official scripts did where they put in a bunch of random placeholders in a circle. He's just relying on being able to avoid things. But it does mean that you often have things clustered together or in perpendicular lines. It's not always obvious, but like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the best place because they have to stay away from the forests and stuff. It's hidden enough, or you don't notice it all the time here, but it's certainly still present. Because he's using these square actor areas and saying, okay, find the closest tile, but the closest to a square is always the parts there rather than the corners. This guarantees that the resources will spawn. There won't be a place where, oh, they didn't find a place to spawn, but it does mean that things tend to be in these straight lines. Yeah, this type of thing. It's not horrible, but it is there. It's actually the real cross. Yeah, that was when it was really obvious. But I mean, it's basically still a cross, more or less. Just here, maybe because it's avoiding the trees or something. You still have the lines. And you have a lot less resources on diagonals, but here they're kind of in a line. It's a bit better here. And we have extra stuff. What is extra stuff? Lazy female. If extra stuff. If Empire Wars. So that creates extra villagers for Empire Wars. Let's not worry about Empire Wars. Aesthetics. Create birds. We're creating a rug. And see, this is where he's really put in a lot of effort for really small things. Where he's using, you know, a special debug flag. He's made a placeholder to keep rugs a certain distance away from players. Fine. Debug. Do I have my own? No, I don't. I can. Well, that's not true. I have like generic. I want to look at the rug for a second, then I'll answer that question. I'm not seeing a rug right now. All right, there are the rugs. Not seeing the flag. Oh well. No, I have things like the Snow Arabia where I just took the DE Arabia and modified it a bit. I also have just a generic land map. I don't have anything for DE. I made one for Age of Fantasy. It's AOF Arabia. Where essentially I sort of made a generic land map. But it's not so complicated. We create some player lands, create some elevation, create some cliffs, create some forests. We do have our placeholders, but it's not too much work. Create some objects. Okay, we import some objects. We are deep diving. We're already pretty far along, actually. When we started out, this thing was rice farms on an empty plain. Now we have an actual Arabia with rugs. Team American. Alright, so this is just... Take a look at what wildlife is. 37 matches. That's a lot of matches. Wildlife, 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 wildlife. I want to know what wildlife is, though. Wild horse. Okay. That's what I thought. No, what we had at the beginning... is we had some interesting things that looked like this. I'll show the... to help with the forests, and then we had placeholders for a long time. If we put in a break just somewhere randomly in here, Then we had some rings of placeholders. We had locations where forests are going to be. And then we actually put the forests on. We have our pawns, so we have showed that pawns can be in the player forest specifically because it's set up like that. Yeah, scroll back in the VOD if you want to see that in excruciating detail. So we were at some rugs. Lazy. Oh my goodness. Let me look for a rug, see if I can find a rug. I know where we were. Create object rug. There we go. So here we create horses, aesthetic flat. This is basically some sort of eye candy, probably, that he's putting in here. That's the rugs. Yes, except they're not actually for flying. The tepish is the rug. They also only spawn if it's Arabia, it seems. Do we see that? Is that the case? Yeah, theme Eastern. So that's the desert one. It only spawns desert version. I mean, that's a nice touch. And it even gets its own placeholder. I guess this is just this placeholder is just being placed right in the middle, probably. Probably just being placed right on the TC. I think. And we have some more flat aesthetic groups. Then we have some global enigmas. Where you can have like a broken cart with some barrels and a skeleton, or you can have a well with some barrels, or you can have a gallows with a skeleton, or you can have a sign, or you can have a skeleton, or you can have a rug, just at a random place somewhere as decoration somewhere on the map. Now, the interesting thing too is actually relics spawn after all this other crap, so to say. Let's see. Balanced relics. Let's see if he uses balanced relics or not. Count 2 occurrences. Balanced relics is defined. Alright. So he's creating an excess of relics on Ludicrous. Alright. Yeah, good that Ludicrous is supported. One player game has 1 relic. So these are relics per player, likely. We're replacing 1, 2, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0? Riddle me that logic. Hey, 8 is pretty close to players. On the other hand, small is the 3-player size, which nobody plays. Find closest. Place on specific land ID 420. 420 is the land in the middle of the map. Tiny 1-tile land. This is why we need the crazy number of actor areas. Because he does actually have a neutral land. I'd forgotten about that. Creates this land right in the middle. And we haven't really used it for much of anything, have we? We have the safe lurable thing, but that's not active in this code. Edge avoidance is active, but isn't necessary anymore. And now we're here. Honestly, is that land really needed? Probably not. Alright, but so we just have the space thing. I guess relics are last, so you can afford to do a really big min distance group placement. Yeah, 8 players on a tiny map need smaller distances, fair enough. And then we're also placing a relic for each player. If it's a 1-player game, we placed 1 neutral relic and 4 for each player. If it's a 2-player game, we place 2 for each player. Else we place 1 for each player. So that means if we do a bit of math, we end up with 5. Here we end up with, should also be 5, right? 2-player game, we place 2 for every player. And 1 is 5, yeah. 2 for every player is 6. 2, that should be 8 on a 3-player. Am I being dumb again? I probably am. The 3-player game, you do 1 for each player, so that's 3. Plus 2 is 5. We have 4 plus 1 is 5. Then we have 5 plus 0 is 5. Then we have 6 plus 1 is 7 relics. Or is it? No. It's just 6. 6 plus 1. It is 7 relics on the 6-player size. Yeah. Interesting. Well, on 7 players, it's still 7 relics. 8 players on a gigantic map is 9 relics. Okay, and Ludicrous has a special case. Yeah. Okay. Is he... okay, maybe... We'll see in a second if he actually puts the neutral relic on that land in the middle. I don't like that. But I think that's what he's doing, isn't it? He's putting it close to the center. He does that on runestones, too. I don't really like that. Because then you know that one of the relics is in the middle. I guess it helps with relic balance, but I don't like that. That is what that's for. Yeah. Alright. Here, they're just avoiding all kinds of things. Avoiding a ridiculous number of actor areas. Alright. And we are actually at the end of the game. Of the script. So, let's take a look at the relics. 1 is right in the center. Oh, I gave this even as feedback. Well, I don't play Arabia on the ladder. I always have it banned and play Mega Random instead. Or Hideout, or something like African Clearing. But I don't play Arabia. Okay, yeah. So he has that land to always put one in the middle. Now, that's also not necessary anymore with the new things where you can say find closest to map center. So you could do that without having this land in the middle. But this is probably still left over from when that wasn't an option. Right. I remember I gave this as feedback when I saw the test version. That I didn't like the idea, because there is one problem here with this. If you play King of the Hill or something like that, basically King of the Hill, it deletes this relic. I feel like. I don't remember if that's actually the case, but I think I tested this and it does. Because it just places the monument in the center and deletes it. The other thing is that the relics were almost too well distributed, although it's not always the case. But often you can just be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exactly. This is what I want to show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not always the case, so it's okay, but it's almost as if they're in this X shape for 1v1. Luckily can be different too, so you can't, it's not excessively predictable. And then we still have our rows of resources sometimes. But overall, Arabia is pretty good. Well, you can also do that with Vietnamese more easily. But yes, I can see how that would be the case, because you look at the relics and you're like, all right, none of those are going to be close to players. Here, I can see this even on the minimap. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's just a lot of things in one row. It's not just me. These things are lined up. 1, 2, 3. Again here. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's just me, but anyway, we're all the way through. If you want, you can scroll back on the video and look at the things at the beginning. You could. Let's just take a look at the beginning here, because I skipped over that when we did it. See if there's anything else interesting. Enable themes. So yeah, you can have Eastern, Asian, European, African, American, African. We've seen all of those. This is just the new forest stuff. It's called old, but it's what's currently active. Forest distance. How many forests there are. Or how many forests there are. Okay. Basically, if the forests are close, then you'll only have 2 or 3. If they're medium, you'll have 2, 3, or 4, and if they're far, you'll have 3 or 4. I think this was even in the patch notes. And if they're very far, then you're always going to have 4. And then you're more likely to have bigger ones if they're far. Like, all of this fancy code allows him to then set up something pretty simple at the beginning for that. Then more with the forest, we have our ponds, we have our elevation with different sizes, we have our ponds. I feel like these predator things, I guess they are active actually. How many predators do we get when they're abundant? 10. But they're grouped really far away, so it doesn't actually appear to be that many. Or at least they're not close to each other, so it's not a problem. What else have we got? Oh yeah, and then these are the different random things that just interesting eye candy for casters to look at. Here I want to play around a bit. The debug mode should put in all the flags, right? The debug mode activates all the debug. You have flags all over the place. We have the flags for the villagers. I didn't look in detail what these flags do, but I think those are probably areas that resources have to avoid. Maybe to keep them from being in exactly straight lines, he puts in these things. That's why they're always offset a bit. They're still in lines, but the lines aren't completely perpendicular. They're on one side or the other, because he's put in these things on the exact lines that need to be avoided. So you end up with a line that's next to the perpendicular cross. The debug mode is useful though. I can see how this helps. Okay. Debug mode. Let's try terrain debugging. I think that will just do... Maybe that will just do the forests and not everything else. The terrain debugging just removes a lot of things. Nomad map. All right. Actually, this could be fun too. Can we just turn his Arabia into Nomad by doing that? See what happens if we do that. Do we end up with no TC or do everything? Okay, we just end up with villagers and a horse. And then we activate scattered villagers and we have Krzini's land nomad, more or less. Land nomad Arabia. The horse spawns. Okay, there's a flag for all of them. There's probably some fancy code to keep them far apart. And this is how you could scatter villagers properly on Nomad. It's a lot of work, but it does seem that... Well, let's check. It does seem that it keeps villagers from other players far apart, I was going to say. Maybe not. Alright, what else have we got? Centralized spawn. Restricted spawn. Enable walls, corner pieces. Side queen. Define legacy code. I like that. Let's define some legacy code. What's that do? 3 matches. Oh, it just changes behavior version. I mean, this is the type of thing I have. This is roughly the complexity of my hyperrandom. I have things like this in it, but I don't have it on most of my standard maps. Yeah, okay. We don't need a legacy code. Enable edge, mode toggle, escalation, yeah. Overwrites. So that turns... That's probably the dead tree as a straggler. Then this is just for each theme. Makes sense. (2A). The heck is this? Oh, this is just some random code to choose. You know, basically this is pick set 7, pick set 5 or something. If you have to choose between 2, you can choose between A and B. If you have to choose between 6, you have to choose between that many. It keeps all of the random statements out of this section here. I mean, this is basically the type of stuff I have in hyperrandom. The top. I have that in some of my other maps, not all of them. Now, this is the type of thing that ideally, if you're an official dev, you have in a separate file so that you can include it in all your maps rather than having it in all of your maps directly, making them super long. And what have we got here? We define those are the placeholders and so on. We saw those. And then we have basically just defining everything for no particular reason. But just to have it defined, I guess. If he wants to use a certain farmland terrain, it's ready. Let's see, does he have... 69? Nah, it doesn't have it. It doesn't have the evil fog in here yet. Shallow swamp. Okay, it doesn't have the new forest either. This is useful though if you're ever making a map and you want to know like which things don't blend, you can look at scripts. Or if you want to know which animals contain how much food. I think the LOS thing was possibly changed, maybe not. Or at least they were given the same LOS for cows and buffalo. This is 12,000 lines. 300,000 characters. Compare that to something. Let's see if we go here. That's Hyperrandom is a bit longer. I think Megarandom is even longer. I have Megarandom open right now, do I? RS. The problem is, yeah, Megarandom is similar. It's more lines, but the number of characters isn't any longer. The problem is the file size. When it's much bigger than this, it takes long to generate and even longer to transfer in the lobby. Like you can go bigger than this, but you can't go, 10 times as big. Which people have tried to do. Now, before you go completely crazy about that, those super big maps are not this complex. It's more trying to use an external program and then specifying, 100 by 100 lands, sort of paint a map externally and then generate it. And then have a bunch of different options pre-computed. So that's something like this, where you just have basically you generate it in some other program and you have lots and lots of different pre-computed map layouts. And you end up with very many characters. Interestingly, the number of characters is roughly the number of MB divided by 100,000. That's gone. Let's take a look here. Deer, 4 javelina, elephant, rhino. Good. Iron boar is gathered very fast, but it's also dangerous. Wolf dire. These things are a bit buggy if you actually use them. Sometimes military units won't, or generally units won't auto-retaliate against some of these, or one of them has a tiny hitbox so ranged units can't hit it. Here you can learn the habitat of a macaw or a vulture found in grasslands and deserts. Avoids heavily forested areas. Seagulls are basically, they don't count as birds. They're just decoration from the docks. Swordfish, box turtles, snapper, tuna, salmon, perch only has 200 food by default. We have our marlins, dolphin. This thing is buggy. There are a couple more buggy fish like this, but don't want to use those. Those are all the trees. I mean, actually, something like this would be useful just to have available if you ever want to look at, or just have it predefined, have all the trees predefined for yourself. Or if you want to know that Oak H is identical to Oak G, but with green leaves. Yeah, these are the alternate things there, yeah. It's completely unsolid. This might be actually editable now with all the new things that we can do. Alright, original horse, we have our camels, we have our villagers. He basically just has everything to find. More or less everything that you might want to use. The old siege tower that shoots arrows, which I sometimes have a scout on hyper random. Buildings. Walls. Solid aesthetics. These are the different types of grass and rocks. These are the rocks. Mountains. It makes sense to have these all defined like once, but this is the type of thing that you actually want in like your random map def file, ideally. These are now predefined, so this isn't necessary anymore. We have a barrier object. Invisible tree that is impassable until it is cut by a ground attack. Terrain blocker. Doesn't allow objects to generate on the same tile. Must not be used as a player object. Then we have our orthodox. This is basically where we started. Oh, then this makes the decay time for all kinds of things super long. I'm not sure why this is being done. Is this always active? Is preliminaries true? Yeah, defined preliminaries is true. So does this mean that the rubble on normal Arabia just lasts forever? Why is a good question. You certainly can. Let's do a test. If I just like destroy a house and then sit around for half an hour, will the rubble disappear? Standard. Is the house listed here? Rubble, house, feudal, castle. Rubble, house. Rubble, house, dark. Feudal, castle. So, will the house last for 8.3 hours? We need to test this. We're going to take our two villagers that are nicely positioned together for house building. We're going to up the speed to 8 times speed. We're going to destroy the house. Well, now we're going to wait around 8.3 hours. No, but we're going to wait around like 5 minutes. Just take a look. Because normally this is a decay time of like 2 minutes. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. So, why... Gaia set attribute. This only sets the decay time to 8.3 hours for Gaia. So why this is done, you can't see it on Arabia, but on Aftermath it's probably so that the rubble hangs around forever. More or less. It's for Gaia. So he's doing that, I think, for Aftermath. Probably. If I have Aftermath somewhere available. Common. DRS, game data, Aftermath. Repressed supremacy. Don't ask me what that does, but we're gonna find out. Oh, it's the trade workshop resources. But anyway, here we should have like rubble. Alright, we have way too many occurrences of rubble, but if we go further... Yeah, we actually place rubble as a Gaia object. Set Gaia object only, and we're placing rubble. Yeah. That map actually had an interesting bug where he wanted damaged walls, right? Aftermath. So there's something with petards that explode right at the beginning to damage the walls, I believe. And the problem is if your scout spawned too close to it, then the initial explosion right at the beginning could kill your scout. That's been fixed now. That was a fun bug. This changes the line of sight of birds to 0 so that they don't help Gaia with boilers and stuff like that. Then he's created, if you ever need placeholders with various types of terrain restrictions, check in Crisigny's scripts. Fun to realize how it was happening. Not fun for having Arabia in the ranked, or Aftermath in the ranked ladder, of course. If you need a placeholder that only generates on land and shallows, essentially these are just unused objects that he's given the terrain ID. Here are no restrictions. This one is the terrain ID for land terrain. This is something you can see in Advanced Genie Editor, the terrain ID for each of these. Permanently reveals part of the map. That could be useful. Lazy Villager. Legacy Lazy Villager. Forgotten Empire's flag. Yeah, in Empire Wars, to make a villager that's lazy at the beginning, you can't spawn a villager. You need to spawn something that dies into a villager after the map starts, after the game starts. Otherwise, the villager will go run and do something. Beginning. This was something that DE changed, so he's changing it again so that these huntables can be on beaches. That's something I've done too. And this is a sensible thing, I guess, to keep, if you're using these aesthetics, to keep them from in the water. And this makes horses have no line of sight either. And this upgrades birch trees into dead trees. Huh. Maybe none of his maps have birch trees normally. Well, yeah, no, that's fine. I think this is a good time to probably end the stream anyway as well. We did learn a lot about Arabia, me included. I hadn't looked at that in so much detail. Thanks for joining. Have a good night yourself too. And anyone else who's here, you can always go back, look at the VOD, I'll save it on my Twitch. And enjoy the new main menu background. Alright, yeah, I think that's good. Goodbye, everyone.